New York, December. Snow fell in soft spirals along the Hudson River. Outside, the tall windows of a riverside Italian restaurant taxis blinked through the blur of winter lights. Inside, a long dinner table glowed under candlelight and crystal. It was a family gathering, formal yet familiar designer dresses, polished cufflinks, and the hum of carefully curated small talk. Everyone was there for one reason: her mother's 70th birthday. Everyone, including Olivia, who had flown 14 hours from Nairobi to be on time. No one asked how her flight was. No one asked if she was tired. She arrived and was still treated like she had shown up late. She poured red wine into her uncle's glass with a polite smile. As she leaned forward, her sister-in-law spoke, the tone syrupy sweet, but unmistakably sharp. "Still showing up solo every year, huh? Aren't you a little too old to be this busy, without a family?" The wine bottle paused mid-pour. Olivia blinked once but said nothing. Across the table, her uncle chuckled, swirling his drink. "She doesn't have a family, remember, just flies around saving the world or something. All that global impact. But who's going to be there for her when she's the one in need?" Someone cleared their throat. Another cousin looked down at their plate. No one spoke up. They'd heard this before, and no one ever stopped it. They called it concern, but it always came dressed as condescension. Olivia placed the wine bottle back gently. Her shoulders relaxed, but her chest burned. Then her mother, the woman she had admired, missed and crossed oceans for, set down her glass of Pinot Grigio and adjusted her napkin with deliberate calm. Her voice was neutral, almost emotionless. "You've wasted your life, Olivia. You should have had children, instead of running around fixing everyone else's." Silence. The music from the restaurant's violinist floated on, soft and detached, as if it too was trying to escape the weight in the air. No one defended her. No one said that was unfair. No one even looked at her. And in that moment, at a birthday dinner, she should never have come back, for Olivia realized something deeper than pain. She wasn't invisible. She was unwelcome. She looked up slowly, her face calm, her pulse steady. But inside, something had finally snapped. She didn't need a clock to tell her. The time had come. It didn't start with the dinner. It never does. The kind of dismissal Olivia felt that night wasn't born in a single moment. It was layered over decades, one silent cut at a time. She was 19 when she opened the email. Harvard, full ride, a scholarship for women in global leadership. She remembered screaming alone in the back stairwell of her dorm. She called home immediately, her heart racing. Her father answered. She told him the news, expecting shock, maybe pride, maybe even the briefest flicker of joy. He was silent for a moment. Then, "That's nice, but honestly, Olivia, you're a woman. How much more do you need to study? Don't forget, books won't change the fact that one day you'll need to settle down." She still remembers the way her stomach dropped, like the world had congratulated her with open arms, but her own family had quietly turned their backs. Harvard was a whirlwind. She wrote papers that got published. She interned at UNESCO. She once shook hands with Michelle Obama. But at home, no one asked about any of it. At family gatherings, they'd tell her cousins, "She's in school," then immediately pivot to wedding plans or baby names. No one ever remembered what she was majoring in. No one asked. When she graduated top 5%, she flew back for her cousin Amanda's engagement party. She brought a thoughtful gift and wore the dress her mom suggested. During dinner, her uncle clinked his glass and stood to give a toast. "To Amanda for making our family proud." The first woman of her generation to do it right. Engagement before 30. Everyone clapped. Olivia smiled. She was used to being erased by then. At 28, she launched her first startup, a tech for education platform connecting rural schools in Southeast Asia with mobile learning. The product gained traction. UNICEF reached out. TEDx invited her to speak. When she told her father, he scoffed. "Another one of your startup things." "That's just noise, Olivia. Real success is stable, something you can explain to your kids someday." She hung up without saying goodbye. Her mother, more diplomatic, said nothing. Silence was her language. A deep, quiet ocean where disappointment could drift unspoken for years. By 32, Olivia had opened 3 international offices. She was mentoring female founders. She even consulted for the UN. But at Christmas dinner, her family still introduced her as Olivia. She travels a lot. Kinda hard to keep track, right? Every year she sent gifts, thoughtful ones. Hand-wrapped, handwritten cards presents sourced from her travels. She sent them on time. Birthday boxes for her nieces and nephews, thoughtful gifts for her cousins' new babies, even wine from Tuscany for her brother's anniversary. She never got a thank you call. She never saw her name in the family group chat. In fact, she wasn't in the group chat. She found out when her cousin uploaded a photo to Instagram, a surprise reunion dinner. All the aunts and uncles, her brother, her sister-in-law, even the new baby. Olivia wasn't there, and hadn't even known it happened. She clicked the message button under the post, typed, then erased, typed again. Finally she sent, "Did I miss an invite?" The reply came 20 minutes later from Amanda. "Oh, I think it was just something last minute. Probably got lost in the mix." And that was that. At 35, when she had just returned from launching an emergency education fund in South Sudan, her entire extended family gathered for her cousin's baby shower. It was a lavish affair: balloons, name cards, printed napkins with the baby's name. Olivia flew in early, dressed modestly, and tried to blend in. When the champagne came out, her aunt turned to her and said, "You know you're almost 40. Are you ever going to settle down and give your poor mother a grandchild?" Olivia laughed softly. Her aunt didn't. "I mean, you're not getting any younger. What will you even have to show for all that work in the end?" It wasn't the first time she'd heard it. It wouldn't be the last. She never made a scene. That was her rule. Olivia never raised her voice, never rolled her eyes. But each time it happened, something inside her went quieter, a slow, methodical folding in of herself, the way you might close a precious letter after reading it too many times. She kept trying, of course. We all do. That Thanksgiving, she emailed her mother asking for the pumpkin pie recipe she used to make when Olivia was little. She wanted to recreate it abroad for her team. The reply came 3 days later, addressed to Lillian. She replied gently, "Mom, I think you meant this for me." Her mother answered, "Oh, honey, sorry. You know I'm getting older. Don't get hung up on little things." A name, her name, the one she carried alone through every airport into every boardroom, the one she'd had stitched on her first business card, the one that never seemed to belong in her own home. Little things. When her cousin had her second baby, the family commissioned a painting. A family tree, custom-designed, hand-painted, framed. Olivia's name wasn't on it. She stood in the hallway during that party, sipping ginger ale, while everyone else drank champagne. She stared at the tree for a full 3 minutes, counting branches. Her name should have gone beneath her father's, but it didn't. The next day, she donated $10,000 in that cousin's name to a literacy project in rural Cambodia. No one ever knew. No one asked. No one cared. But Olivia did. Because when you're invisible in your own family, your kindness becomes currency no one recognizes. Your milestones become rumors. Your wins are lucky. Your sacrifices are forgotten. And still you show up. You send the card. You take the call. You try. Until one day, you don't. And on that day, everything changes. But not just yet. After a while, Olivia stopped explaining. Not out of anger, not even disappointment, just clarity. There comes a moment when trying to be seen becomes more exhausting than simply walking forward alone. And so she did. She stopped telling them when she won awards. She no longer sent updates about the programs she was building or the lives she was changing. Her mother didn't read them. Her father shrugged them off. Her cousins barely understood what she did anyway. So she chose silence. And in that silence, she built everything. It started in Kenya, in a borrowed office behind a school that barely had running water. She listened to teachers who walked 5 miles to class, to girls who hid in the shadows during lectures because there weren't enough uniforms. She saw potential wrapped in dust and urgency, and from that urgency, she developed an idea, a digital learning platform tailored for rural Africa bandwidth, light heavy on storytelling and relevance. No press release, no LinkedIn announcement. Just her laptop, a solar panel, and the resolve to make something that lasted. She called it Lumera Light in Swahili. Within a year, the Kenyan Ministry of Education had asked her team to pilot it across 6 provinces. UNICEF called. The Gates Foundation left a voicemail. She didn't return it immediately. Instead, she flew to Islamabad. Quietly. No fanfare, no social media check-in. There, in a small co-working space near the edge of Rawalpindi, she met 3 young women building a startup that taught soft skills and self-defense to girls in conservative communities. Their funding had collapsed. Their laptops were outdated. But their ideas, they were thunder waiting to be heard. Olivia wired them $50,000 from a holding company in Singapore. She stayed 2 weeks, slept on a friend's floor, helped them restructure their curriculum. Then she left. When her father called that month to ask if she could attend her nephew's school play, she simply said, "I'll be out of the country." He didn't ask where. That summer, she sat alone on a balcony in Kigali, Rwanda, watching the sun slip behind the hills, and opened a folder labeled Personal Financial Strategy. She read every line, twice, then again. She taught herself what no one had ever taught her: how to move money smartly, quietly, safely. She opened accounts in Zurich and Geneva, diversified holdings across 4 continents, and built a trust under her grandmother's maiden name, the only woman in the family who had ever truly seen her. The trust's mission: to fund education for first-generation daughters of migrant families. She named it the Lydia Trust, after her grandmother, who once told her, "You don't have to be loud to be unforgettable." She hadn't shared that with anyone, not even her assistant. By year 3, Olivia was managing global capital with the same discretion a shadow uses to travel present, but never announcing itself. An invitation arrived from the World Economic Forum. Private roundtable. 10 women under 40 who were shifting global systems. She RSVP'd yes, but quietly. No speech, no photo ops. Just her voice in a room where power sat casually over coffee. That winter in Doha, she negotiated with a representative from the Qatari royal family. They were launching an education initiative spanning the Gulf and North Africa. They wanted someone who understood scale without ego. Someone who could build systems that didn't collapse when the spotlight moved on. She wore a navy suit, minimal makeup, spoke when necessary. They signed the MOU in a room with no cameras. And still back home, she was asked if she'd ever consider applying for a real job. Olivia no longer reacted. She simply adjusted the trust's endowment strategy and added 2 zeros to a donation request from a girls' school in Peru. She transferred the funds under a separate name just to be safe. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't spite. It was designed, precision, power in stillness. She became the kind of woman they wrote about but never interviewed. The kind whose name appeared quietly on donor walls in fine print, tucked beneath the gilded archways of institutions she had never attended, but changed anyway. At family events, when someone asked what she did, she'd say, education projects. If pressed, some tech development abroad. If they glazed over, she smiled and let them. Because what she was building didn't require their approval or their attention. What they called wandering, she called world building. What they dismissed as busy, she understood as legacy. Once when her mother commented, "I still don't know what you do all day," Olivia simply replied, "That's okay. You're not supposed to." And it was the truth. Her success wasn't loud because it didn't need to be. It wasn't something she held up like a trophy. It was something she wore like armor, invisible but impenetrable. And in that stillness, Olivia discovered something more powerful than belonging sovereignty. She no longer needed to be included in conversations that didn't know how to hold her. She had stopped asking for a seat at tables that were never built for her voice. And with every quiet, calculated step, she built her own. Not with vengeance, not with malice, but with such grace and clarity that one day, when the world finally looked up, she would already be far above them. Not waving, not waiting, just rising. And that she had decided would be enough. For months, Olivia had been thinking about coming home, really coming home. Not just for birthdays or funerals or quick layovers between Nairobi and Geneva, but something quieter, slower, more permanent. She'd been dreaming of a version of life where she wasn't always boarding another flight landing in a new time zone or waking up to global crises in her inbox. A version where she had time to breathe, to sit, to reconnect. Especially with her mother. They hadn't been close in the way some mothers and daughters were. There were no heart-to-hearts over tea, no long meandering phone calls just to check in. But there was history and blood, and the haunting question of what if? What if Olivia had been less ambitious, less distant, less foreign? Could they have found their way back to each other? She had imagined it often. Small things at first, helping her mother with groceries, joining Sunday dinners, maybe even turning down a few international projects so she could stay longer. Maybe trading the skyline for a porch swing. Maybe becoming the daughter her mother could finally understand. It wasn't weakness, it was longing. The kind that sneaks up on even the strongest people when they've been gone too long and achieved too much alone. And so when the invitation came, her mother's 70th birthday dinner, Olivia took it as a sign. A possible beginning. She adjusted her calendar, rescheduled 2 flights, and asked her assistant to handle the Geneva prep without her. It would be the first time she'd chosen them over work. A quiet experiment. A test. The night at the restaurant wasn't just a family dinner. It was her unspoken question, dressed in heels and lipstick. If I stopped everything, would you want me here? She arrived early, had her coat pressed, picked out a necklace her mother once gave her and hadn't remembered. She told herself to smile more, to be gentle, to be open. And at first it felt possible. The lighting was soft, the food was good. Her cousins greeted her with polite surprise. There was even a moment when her mother touched her wrist lightly while reaching for the salt. A tiny familiar gesture that made Olivia's throat tighten unexpectedly. Maybe this time would be different. But hope, as she'd learned, is a fragile thing. Because just as the main course was served and the conversation turned inward, domestic, nostalgic, intimate, it came. First, a jab from her sister-in-law. Still traveling solo. Olivia, don't you ever get tired of chasing the wind? Then her uncle said, she's always been the flight risk of the family. Just shows up, then vanishes. Not how we do things around here. Laughter followed. Not cruel, just casual. Thoughtless. The kind that left bruises even as it smiled. And then her mother. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look angry. She simply said it like one might comment on the weather or the price of wine. You've wasted your life, Olivia. You should have had children, instead of running around fixing everyone else's. It was not a question. It was a verdict. And in that moment, Olivia felt the test break quietly inside her. All the scenarios she'd played in her head, the softened relationships, the possible healing, the sacrifices she was willing to make to be closer, collapsed in on themselves like paper in rain. There was no seat waiting for her at this table, only the illusion of one. She had wanted to believe that if she paused her world even for a little while, someone in that room might reach out and say, "You were missed. You matter." But what she got was a confirmation she hadn't wanted, that her absence had been more convenient than her presence ever was. She hadn't come looking for praise, or even forgiveness. Just a small crack in the wall, a place to knock and be let in. Instead, they'd bolted it shut with one sentence. "You've wasted your life." The words rang in her ears long after the laughter resumed, long after the next bottle of wine was opened, long after someone asked if she could help take a group photo. She said yes, of course. She always did. But inside, the decision had already been made. Not out of spite, not from anger, but from understanding. She would never belong here, not fully, not deeply, not the way she'd always hoped. And if coming home meant shrinking to fit back into a space that no longer recognized her, then maybe it was never home to begin with. The room was warm, lit by the golden glow of candles and low chandeliers, but Olivia felt cold. It wasn't just her mother's words that chilled her. It was the silence that followed. The ease with which everyone carried on knives against porcelain wine poured like nothing had happened. There was no pause, no apology, not even the slightest ripple in the air that suggested someone might have thought, maybe we went too far. She sat back slightly in her chair, her eyes soft but unreadable. Her hands remained folded in her lap, resting against the midnight silk of her dress. She didn't speak. She didn't defend herself. She'd done that before, and it never changed the outcome. Instead, she allowed herself a small breath barely there. It wasn't a resignation. It was clarity, the kind that comes when you finally understand a truth you've been avoiding for years. She glanced around the table. Her cousin Amanda was posting a photo of the appetizer. Her brother was adjusting his cufflinks. Her mother was swirling the last of her Pinot Grigio, looking pleased with how balanced the night had felt. And then, a shift. Not loud, not disruptive, but felt. A shadow emerged from the far end of the room, purposeful, calm. A man in a dark tailored suit moving through the waitstaff like he belonged there, which in some way he did. He approached the table quietly, stopping just behind Olivia's chair. His expression was unreadable professional, a discreet earpiece curled along his right ear, almost invisible under the soft lighting. Most of the family didn't even notice him. He leaned slightly forward, lowered his voice to a near whisper and said, "Ma'am, Geneva confirmed. The Crown Prince is waiting. The jet is ready. If we leave within the hour, you'll make the signing." Olivia didn't move. She didn't blink. The man added gently, "Security has cleared the airspace. We're pre-authorized for the Swiss corridor." At that exact moment, her watch buzzed subtly, a gentle vibration against her skin. She lifted her wrist just slightly, angling it so only she could see the message light up across the frosted display, UN-backed Fund 7 Dubai Agreement. Signature window expires at 11:59 p.m. CET. Her eyes flicked toward the upper corner of the restaurant, where snow had begun to drift heavier against the window. Somewhere over the Atlantic, her name was on a diplomatic flight plan. A second device somewhere in her assistant's pocket was tracking her location in real time. Her presence at that table was costing more than just money. It was time, opportunity, history. She turned her gaze slowly across the table. Her mother was laughing at something her uncle had just said. Amanda was showing off a baby video on her phone. No one noticed the man behind her. No one even looked up. No one, it seemed, expected her to matter enough for anything important to be happening to her. She allowed herself to watch them. Really watch them for just a second longer. Not with resentment, but with distance. As if she were already gone. And in a way she was. They had chosen not to see her. Year after year, dinner after dinner, birthday after birthday. They had reduced her existence to stories they didn't want to understand, accomplishments they didn't want to ask about, and a lifestyle they found too threatening to respect. But tonight, they wouldn't be able to pretend anymore. Because tonight, the quiet woman at the end of the table was about to walk out, not in anger, not in tears, but with a kind of authority that didn't ask permission. Her phone lit up next, sliding silently on the table screen up as the assistant placed it there. She glanced down. A single-line message from Geneva Crown Prince Fahim is reviewing your framework now. Final signature to be done in person. She turned to the assistant, her voice low but unwavering. "How long to Teterboro?" 23 minutes, with current traffic," he replied. "And the car, already waiting, ma'am. Side entrance." There was a silence between them that held mutual understanding. She gave a single nod, not of approval, of conclusion. As the assistant stepped away just as quietly as he had arrived, Olivia picked up her wineglass and took one last sip. She looked back at her mother. There was no announcement, no dramatic goodbye, no raised voice or clinking of glass. She simply stood, placed her napkin on the table, and said with measured grace, "Thank you for dinner." Someone asked, "Are you going already?" She turned to them, gentle but firm. "I have somewhere I'm needed." Amanda laughed nervously. "Wow, that sounded serious." Olivia smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes but still commands attention. "It is." She didn't elaborate. And as she walked past the table, heels silent against the marble floor, one of the servers opened the side door for her already informed. A black car waited just beyond the glass engine, humming, the driver holding the door open with one white gloved hand. Inside that car was the folder that held her life's work and a pen, the one her family would never see. But the world had been waiting, and now so was the Crown Prince. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She wasn't leaving the dinner. She was entering history. She stood up slowly. No dramatic gestures. No clinking of silverware. Just a quiet push of the chair against the floor. Enough sound to register, but not enough to disturb. Her mother glanced up, surprised by the movement. Olivia's napkin was still in her hand, perfectly folded, untouched by anything but the corner of her palm. She didn't throw it. She didn't toss it. She simply set it down carefully beside her wineglass, a gesture so deliberate, so measured, it felt ceremonial. The chatter around the table faded, not because she demanded attention, but because something in the room shifted subtly, like a cold breeze threading through the warmth. Something about the stillness in her shoulders, the way she looked everyone directly in the eye for the first time that night. And then she spoke. Her voice wasn't raised. It was calm, even, almost too quiet. "I'm sorry," she said, and for a split second, her mother's lips parted in surprise, as if the apology came too easily. But Olivia didn't pause. Her eyes never left her mother's. "I'm sorry for disappointing you for the past 38 years. There it was. A gasp somewhere to her left, someone trying not to react. A nervous reach for a water glass. A faint clatter of a fork being put down. "I know I never fit the version of me you wanted," she continued. "And for a long time I thought that was my failure, not yours." No one moved. Her father looked away. Her brother blinked and lowered his gaze to his plate. Even Amanda, with her perfectly symmetrical face and perpetual social media grin, lost the smile for once. Olivia's voice stayed soft, but with each word the air grew heavier, thicker. "I spent most of my life trying to shrink," she said. "To become quieter, simpler, more acceptable. I thought if I gave enough, achieved enough, showed up enough, eventually I'd be let in." A pause. "And now I understand. The door was never meant to open for me. It was always just there to remind me I was on the outside. Someone opened their mouth perhaps to say something conciliatory to smooth it over. But Olivia held up a hand gently, and somehow that tiny motion silenced everything again. "I flew halfway across the world for this dinner," she said, "not because I needed to be here, but because part of me still hoped you'd see me. That maybe just once you'd ask about what I built instead of what I lack." Her mother's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. "And now I know," Olivia added, "you were never waiting for me to return. You were waiting for me to conform." She stepped back from the table. Calm. Still. Her presence is now undeniable. The man in the dark suit had reappeared at a distance, no longer behind her, just within view. He said nothing, but his presence said everything. Olivia's final words came low, soft, almost reverent. "But today something changed. I'm not angry. I'm not hurt. I'm free." She looked directly at her mother. "Because I finally stopped trying to become someone you'd be proud of. And in doing that, I became someone I'm proud to be." No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the air had turned solid, like they were all encased in a moment none of them had expected, and none of them knew how to escape. She didn't wait for a reaction. She didn't need one. Her hand slid to the back of her chair, steady and slow, as she tucked it back in place, not out of politeness, but closure. And then she turned. The walk to the door felt eternal and instant at once. Every step sounded louder than it should have. Not because of her heels, but because of the absence of interruption. No one stopped her. No one asked her to stay. No one tried to explain. They just watched. Through the wide windows, a black Mercedes was already waiting outside its engine, on headlights casting soft beams onto the freshly fallen snow. The driver stood at attention, white gloves against the chilled air, the back door open like an invitation only power receives without asking. She didn't glance back. She didn't need to. As she stepped through the glass doors and into the night, the assistant approached from the shadows, handing her a coat she hadn't asked for, black wool lined with cashmere warmth stitched into every seam. "Everything is set," he said. "The jet's on standby. Hangar C." Private runway cleared for immediate takeoff. Olivia nodded. She pulled the coat on herself. Behind her inside the restaurant, the table sat full, but suddenly felt small, cramped with unspoken guilt and the echo of a voice they hadn't expected to carry weight. Not like that. Not anymore. Out on the tarmac, the private jet waited in quiet elegance, an aircraft not just of convenience but of sovereignty. Its engines slept but barely. As she approached the runway, lights illuminated the path beneath her feet. Snow clung to her lashes, melted slowly on her collar. The air was cold, yes, but it felt clean. Inside the jet, the tablet was waiting on the table. The document glowed on the screen. 7-day agreement. Signature required. The window expires in 47 minutes. She didn't rush. She settled into the leather seat by the window, crossed her legs, pressed her thumbprint to the screen. It was done. Somewhere far behind her in that warm dining room filled with family and fine wine, they would carry on the evening, unsure of what they had just witnessed, but sensing in some primal way that they had lost something. Not her approval, not her presence, but the last faint chance to know the version of Olivia who still needed them. And now, that woman was gone. The jet was silent as it climbed into the night. Olivia sat near the window, wrapped in the stillness that came only after something final. Not grief, not victory, just clarity, pure and quiet as snowfall. Below, New York glowed like a constellation, laid out in golden veins. Bridges pulsing with cars, towers standing tall in glass and ambition, and somewhere in that sprawl, a dinner table still full, still unaware. She watched it shrink beneath her, the city she once believed might save her, the family she had once begged to see her, to love her in the way she had always deserved. But she wasn't crying. She didn't feel like breaking or shouting or unraveling. What she felt was lighter than air, a silence that stretched outward like wings. A soft chime echoed through the cabin. Her tablet screen lit up with a quiet flash. Transfer confirmed. $2,000 dispersed to Lydia Fund for Girls' Education. Allocation 200 new scholarships. East Africa region. She stared at the notification for a few seconds, then let the screen fade. The funds had been sitting waiting for this moment, the moment she no longer needed anything from the people who once demanded her shrink. Every time they diminished her, she had grown something in the dark. And now hundreds of young girls with no last names on any family trees would go to school because Olivia chose to rise and not return. She didn't tell anyone, not even her assistant. Another alert pinged, a muted vibration from her phone resting on the armrest. Samir, assistant, your name is trending again. Shh, Olivia Reed. When women. Lydia Legacy. The world's listening. She exhaled softly, not surprised, not moved. She didn't chase the spotlight, but it found her anyway. Not because she demanded to be seen, but because she no longer needed to be. That kind of power leaves a trace, even in silence. Outside the window, the moon reflected off the wing, white and clean and untouched. The clouds formed a soft blanket below, and the stars above her blinked like ancient witnesses. There was a time when Olivia thought freedom came with approval, when she believed she had to be forgiven for wanting something more than marriage and milestone photos. She had spent years collecting receipts, degrees, impact reports, headlines, and invitations, all in the hope that one day her family would look at her and say, "Now we understand." But they never did. And now, sitting 40,000 feet above them, she realized she didn't need them to. She reached into the leather pouch beside her and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not business, not legal. A letter written to herself 6 years ago during a layover in Addis Ababa after her first serious burnout. She had written it in a haze of jet lag and coffee, unsure she'd ever read it again. But here it was. The ink had smudged in one corner. It read, "If no one ever claps for you, will you still build the thing that matters? If no one ever invites you home, will you still create your own? If no one ever says they're proud, will you still choose your purpose?" She smiled, not because it was poetic, but because she had. She had chosen over and over again when it would have been easier to turn back, to fold, to disappear into someone more comfortable, more digestible, more quiet. But she had stayed loud, not in volume, but in presence. She had become undeniable. And as she leaned her head back against the headrest, she felt something settle in her chest, not closure, but expansion. A knowing that she had passed through the fire and found air on the other side. Her phone buzzed once more this time, a message from one of the girls she had mentored in Pakistan. "Miss Olivia, they accepted me, Oxford. Full ride. I wanted you to be the first to know." She didn't reply right away. Instead, she opened the window shade and watched the sky stretch out blue-black and endless. She thought of the girl's mother, who'd once walked 3 miles just to attend Olivia's training session, holding her daughter's hand the whole way. She thought of the women in the refugee camp who had taught her to listen without pity. She thought of her grandmother's laugh, low-weathered, full of stories no one had written down. And then she thought of herself. Not the woman in heels at a dinner table, or the strategist on a world stage, just Olivia. The little girl who used to read under the covers with a flashlight. The teenager who felt too much too loudly. The young woman who once wondered if she'd ever be loved if she didn't follow the map everyone else followed. "I'm not lost," she whispered to herself, barely audible over the hum of the jet. "I just stopped walking in circles." She picked up her phone, typed her reply to the girl, and smiled as she pressed send. "I knew you would. Now go make space for others." Outside, the horizon began to shift, the faintest line of light sneaking into the night. Dawn was coming. And somewhere far behind her, people were still sitting at a table waiting for someone she no longer was. She would not be returning. Not to win, not to prove, not to fix. Because she had already won. Because she had already built the world she once begged to belong to. And in that world, no girl would ever have to ask, "Do I matter?" She'd already answered, with every quiet decision, with every name no one remembered. With every moment she chose herself over applause, over permission, over fear. The sky was hers now, and she was finally home. Have you ever sat at a table where every smile felt rehearsed, where the laughter echoed around you but never included you? Have you ever looked around and realized, you're not part of their picture? Not really. You're just there to make the frame look full. Maybe you've been called selfish for choosing your path. Maybe they told you you're too much, too ambitious, too independent, too different. Or maybe they didn't say anything at all. And that silence hurt the most. If you've ever been the black sheep, the outlier, the one they whispered about, joked about, or ignored completely, then maybe you're Olivia too. But here's the truth. They don't tell you. You are not broken for not fitting in. You are brave for refusing to shrink. And sometimes walking away from what's familiar is the most radical kind of love. Love yourself. So I want to ask you something. Have you ever left a table that no longer fed your soul? Have you ever chosen to build your world when the old one shut you out? Tell me in the comments. Your story might be the one that gives someone else the strength to walk away from their version of that table. And if this story moved you even just a little, please consider subscribing to the channel. We're building a space here for stories that hurt, heal, and empower, and your voice is part of that. Leave a comment. Share if it reminds you of someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you believe in stories that don't just entertain, but awaken something in us. Because this isn't just Olivia's story, it's ours. It's yours. And it's not over yet. So tell me, when was the moment you chose yourself?